I recall watching a guy in my high school class fighting another guy, and he had him in a headlock, and he had his lighter out, and he was trying to set his hair on fire, you know? And so, like, you know, crazy stuff like that. I went to a small rural school, you know, but there were some really rough guys, in my class and some of the surrounding classes. And it made a big impression on me. The little verse about watching, you know, my friend, that still brings up tough emotions.
Welcome to We Flew Off the Page. I'm Muhammad Seven, and I'm here to do my very favorite thing in the world, talk to great songwriters about how they do what they do. Each episode will dive into the little details of two of my guests' songs, which I'll play for you. The songwriter has chosen one of their songs, and I have agonized over and selected the other from their catalog of incredible music. Today's show is sponsored by Number 2 Pencils. You can shop Number 2 Pencils anywhere pencils are sold, or save some time and money by digging around in your drawers, couch cushions, and smaller backpack pockets. Graphite is what makes Number 2 Pencils the tool of choice for songwriters everywhere. Just sharpen with a penknife for that old-fashioned look and feel. Your songs will be twice as good when you write them with Number 2 Pencils. Our guest today is songwriter, painter, and poet Austin MacRae. Austin's a singer-songwriter born and raised in rural upstate New York, currently living in Ithaca. His new album, New Weather, is an exploration of his life as a stepfather, and seems to me to be his most personal work yet. Austin MacRae, welcome to We Flew Off the Page.
Thank you so much for having me, Muhammad.
In addition to being a songwriter, you're also a painter. Is there a connection between your painting and your songwriting? And I'll just mention that I am also a serious student of screenwriting, and for me, screenwriting has majorly affected my songwriting.
Yeah, I mean, I think absolutely, you know, at some level, you know, the inspiration comes from the same kind of pool. You know, I think that I would say that my songwriting in general, in some ways, my songwriting and painting are kind of similar in certain ways. I tend to be, my songwriting tends to be pretty accessible, and my painting as well. I try to, with my painting, try to, you know, let's see here, I'm trying to think. I try to make it as accessible as possible, and I would say the same for my songwriting. Yeah.
I like that you're starting the show off by mentioning this dimension of your work, and it's interesting. I hadn't, of course, it seems clear to me now that you mentioned it about your painting. It very much has occurred to me about your songwriting, and I intend to bring that up later in the show. So it's nice that you're starting out with that.
Yeah.
But certainly, so I'll mention for folks who haven't seen your paintings, although everyone should check them out, and links to all of this will be in the show notes. But mostly all not all landscapes. You've done things other than landscapes, but these days that's where you're rocking.
Primarily. Yep, primarily landscapes. And you know, my songwriting, as you all know, is definitely influenced by, you know, the environment in which I grew up, rural upstate New York. My painting as well. Those places where I feel rooted. So there's a real, I guess, rootedness would be a big kind of common kind of denominator in, you know, both my songwriting and my painting. So yeah.
Of course, a big recommendation from I think writers of all kinds is write what you know, and it seems like that very much is.
I've always taken that maxim to heart. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So have I. There's a reason that folks suggest that, right? It's like there's such a depth of understanding and of place and of emotion when you're drawing from that well.
Yeah. Yes, for sure.
In 2012, you published a book of poetry titled The Organ Builder. Which came first for you, poetry or songwriting? And how has your work as a poet affected your songwriting?
Wow, that's kind of a tough question to answer, but I'll do my best. I think probably songwriting came first. Songwriting started back, I think in junior high, I started kind of experimenting with songwriting. And I started out on bass guitar when I was in middle school, and that was back, in the grunge days, the height of Nirvana and Smashing Pumpkins and all those bands that had a huge influence on me. Um, and it wasn't. I would say it wasn't until college that I started the poetry, and I had a teacher in college, who I'm still very close with to this day, who was kind of my mentor through college and introduced me to a lot of poets. And I shift another reason that I shifted over to poetry in college from songwriting was just purely practical. That I didn't go to a college where there were a lot of musicians, and so I kind of that was probably one of the reasons that I got more into the poetry in college. But I say it was a hard question to answer because I feel like they were all kind of there, from the beginning. My mother is a writer, is a poet, and so that was there from an early age. And also the visual arts were there from an early age as well. Both of my parents painted, to a certain extent. So it's kind of the swirling mass of things, influences that started early, and then I've kind of like jumped back and forth between them, throughout my life. Yeah.
You mentioned the grunge of the, I guess, mid '90s. You and I are the same age, so that was, of course, those bands were big influences of mine as well.
Yeah.
Do you see? I'm just, now that you've mentioned it, I'm curious. do you note those influences in your work at all in any way?
I do. I was actually thinking about this recently. Probably my favorite band of the '90s was Smashing Pumpkins. I was obsessed with them for many years. And one of the things looking back on it that I think I connected with, that I probably wasn't even able to really put into words as a younger person, was the kind of dynamics of Billy Corgan's vocals, and how just the in the same song, take an early Smashing Pumpkins song, it could go from being a lullaby to a screaming, almost like much harder song in the same song. And I guess I was really attracted to that, the dynamics of his voice and his songwriting. And I think I've carried that through, my own songwriting. I would say that my voice, even in a single song, can be, very dynamic and register a number of, levels of emotion. And I think that was definitely an early influence on me. So I still think of Billy Corgan. I go back and I listen to some of the songs, and the writing doesn't hold up in the way that it did when I was over time. I think to myself, oh gosh, what were you thinking, but there's still something there. There's still something there that I connect with, even though I may listen to their songs and think, those lyrics, aren't quite as profound as maybe I thought at 16. But you can say that about basically anything that you loved at 16, right? Almost.
Of course. But this is so interesting. I was just having this exact same experience. For whatever reason, I felt like playing Smashing Pumpkins while I was shooting the basketball in the gym a few weeks ago, and I was listening to Disarm, and.
Oh.
And which is an amazing, I love that song.
It's a great song.
But then I was focusing on the lyrics and thinking, wow, exactly what you just said. I was like, wow, he really did a lot with these lyrics in spite of them being.
Yeah, he did. And I would say that song in particular is one of the ones that holds together better for me than some of his others,
Interesting.
But I think at the height of, my kind of maturing and turning into an adult kind of coincided with that band, releasing the big double album, in the late '90s. I don't even remember the name. Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness. I do remember the name of it. And that to me was a magnum opus. At that age, I lived inside those songs. I remember just listening to them over and over and over and over again, all afternoon long, and I could probably still quote quite a few lyrics, but there's something of that has stuck with me. In terms of, as I said, the dynamics and you know the also the gentleness of his voice. I was really
Hmm.
drawn to as well. Could
For
go
you
from
as a folk artist, I'm sorry.
no, no. I was just gonna say it could go from a snarl. He could go from snarling to like, a very gentle delivery. In
Right.
a very short period of time.
Right. For you as a folk artist, I don't think I would have drawn that parallel.
I recall watching a guy in my high school class fighting another guy, and he had him in a headlock, and he had his lighter out, and he was trying to set his hair on fire. And so like crazy stuff like that. I went to a small rural school, but there were some really rough guys, in my class and some of the surrounding classes, and it made a big impression on me. The little verse about watching, my friend, that still brings up tough emotions.
Welcome to We Flew Off the Page. I'm Muhammad 7, and I'm here to do my very favorite thing in the world. Talk to great songwriters about how they do what they do. Each episode will dive into the little details of two of my guests' songs, which I'll play for you. The songwriter has chosen one of their songs, and I have agonized over and selected the other from their catalog of incredible music. Today's show is sponsored by Number 2 Pencils. You can shop Number 2 Pencils anywhere pencils are sold, or save some time and money by digging around in your drawers, couch cushions, and smaller backpack pockets. Graphite is what makes Number 2 Pencils the tool of choice for songwriters everywhere. Just sharpen with a penknife for that old-fashioned look and feel. Your songs will be twice as good when you write them with Number 2 Pencils. Our guest today is songwriter, painter, and poet Austin MacRae. Austin is a singer-songwriter born and raised in rural upstate New York, currently living in Ithaca. His new album, New Weather, is an exploration of his life as a stepfather, and seems to me to be his most personal work yet. Austin MacRae, welcome to We Flew Off the Page.
Thank you so much for having me, Muhammad.
In addition to being a songwriter, you're also a painter. Is there a connection between your painting and your songwriting? And I'll just mention that I am also a serious student of screenwriting, and for me, screenwriting has majorly affected my songwriting.
Yeah, I mean, I think absolutely, at some level, the inspiration comes from the same kind of pool. I think that I would say that my songwriting in general, in some ways, my songwriting and painting are kind of similar in certain ways. I tend to be, my songwriting tends to be pretty accessible, and my painting as well. I try to, with my painting, try to, let's see here, I'm trying to think. I try to make it as accessible as possible, and I would say the same for my songwriting. Yeah.
I like that you're starting the show off by mentioning this dimension of your work, and it's interesting. I hadn't, of course, it seems clear to me now that you mentioned it about your painting. It very much has occurred to me about your songwriting, and I intend to bring that up later in the show. So it's nice that you're starting out with that.
Yeah.
But certainly, so I'll mention for folks who haven't seen your paintings, although everyone should check them out, and links to all of this will be in the show notes. But mostly all not all landscapes. You've done things other than landscapes, but these days that's where you're rocking.
Primarily. Yep, primarily landscapes. And my songwriting, as you well know, is definitely influenced by the environment in which I grew up, rural upstate New York. My painting as well. Those places where I feel rooted. So there's a real, I guess, rootedness would be a big kind of common kind of denominator in both my songwriting and my painting. So yeah.
Of course, a big recommendation from I think writers of all kinds is write what you know. and it seems like that very much
I've always
your
taken that
wheelhouse.
maxim to heart. Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
well, so there's a reason that folks suggest that, right? It's like
Yeah.
there's such a depth of understanding and of place and of emotion when you're drawing
Yeah.
from that well.
Yeah. Yes, for sure.
In 2012, you published a book of poetry titled The Organ Builder. Which came first for you, poetry or songwriting? And how has your work as a poet affected your songwriting?
Wow, that's kind of a tough question to answer, but I'll do my best. Um, I think probably songwriting came first. Songwriting started back, I think, in junior high. I started kind of experimenting with songwriting. And I started out on bass guitar when I was in middle school, and that was back, in the grunge days, the height of Nirvana and Smashing Pumpkins and all those bands that had a huge influence on me. And it wasn't. I would say it wasn't until college that I started the poetry, and I had a teacher in college, who I'm still very close with to this day, who was kind of my mentor through college and introduced me to a lot of poets. And I shift another reason that I shifted over to poetry in college from songwriting was just purely practical. That I didn't go to a college where there were a lot of musicians, and so I kind of, that was probably one of the reasons that I got more into the poetry in college. But, I say it was a hard question to answer because I feel like, they were all kind of there, from the beginning. My mother is a writer, is a poet, and so that was there from an early age. And also the visual arts were there from an early age as well. Both of my parents painted, to a certain extent. So it's kind of the swirling mass of things, influences that started early, and then I've kind of like jumped back and forth between them, throughout my life. Yeah.
You mentioned the grunge of the, I guess, mid '90s. You and I are the same age, so that was, of course, those bands were big influences of mine as well.
Yeah.
Do you see? I'm just, now that you've mentioned it, I'm curious. Do you note those influences in your work at all in any way?
I do. I was actually thinking about this recently. Probably my favorite band of the 90s was Smashing Pumpkins. I was obsessed with them for many years. And one of the things looking back on it that I think I connected with, that I probably wasn't even able to really put into words as a younger person, was the kind of dynamics of Billy Corgan's vocals, and how just the in the same song, take an early Smashing Pumpkins song, it could go from being a lullaby to a screaming, almost like much harder song in the same song. And I guess I was really attracted to that, the dynamics of his voice and his songwriting. And I think I've carried that through, you know, my own songwriting. I would say that my voice, even in a single song, can be, very dynamic and register a number of, levels of emotion. And I think that was definitely an early influence on me. So, I still think of Billy Corgan. I go back and I listen to some of the songs, and the writing doesn't hold up in the way that it did when I was, over time. I think to myself, oh gosh, what were you thinking, but there's still something there. There's still something there that I connect with, even though I may listen to their songs and think, those lyrics, aren't as quite as profound as maybe I thought at 16. But you can say that about basically anything that you loved at 16, right?
Of
Almost.
of course.
Yeah.
This is so interesting. I was just having this exact same experience. For whatever reason, I felt like playing Smashing Pumpkins while I was shooting the basketball in the gym a few weeks ago. And I was listening to Disarm, and
Oh.
and it just, which is an amazing, I love that song,
It's a great song.
but then I was focusing on the lyrics and thinking, wow, exactly what you just said. I was like, wow, he really did a lot with these lyrics in spite of them being.
Yeah, he did. And I would say that that song in particular is one of the ones that holds together better for me than some of his others, you know? Like
Interesting.
yeah, but I think at the height of, you know, my kind of maturing and turning into an adult kind of coincided with that band, like, you know, releasing the big double album, you know, in the late 90s. I don't even remember the name. Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness. I do
Right.
remember the name of it. And that to me was a magnum opus at that age. I lived inside those songs. You know, I remember just listening to them over and over and over and over again, you know, all afternoon long. And I could probably still quote quite a few lyrics, but there's something of that has stuck with me. You know, in terms of, as I said, the dynamics and you know, the also the gentleness of his voice. I was really drawn to as well. You know, could
For
go
you
from
as a folk artist, oh, I'm sorry.
no. I was just gonna say it could go from a snarl. You know, he could go from snarling to like, you know, a very gentle delivery. You know, in
Right.
a very short period of time.
Right. For you as a folk artist, I don't think I would have drawn that parallel. But now that you mention it, it makes perfect sense to me. And I really see it. I think the word I've used to describe your, the way you write melody, your sort of your vocal habits, I've talked about you having a lot of colors. And it's true, which, you know, each color has a different emotion, and, you know, I think your performance is very painterly in that way, and it's interesting that I've always enjoyed that, and it's interesting. Sounds like you think about that on the level of the writing as well, which makes perfect sense.
Yeah, thank you.
Do you know whether or not a song is good immediately after you write it? And a few questions here. You can sort of answer them however you like. So part of that question is, how do you vet a song, and who do you play it for first? How does that process work for you?
My first listener is always my wonderful wife and partner, Rebecca. I play everything for her. Well, occasionally, one of my other friends, like my friend Jen, will be a first listener. But in general, 99% of the time, it's Rebecca. And you know, it's really interesting that question of do I know if a song is really good right away? Not always. Not always. I've been surprised sometimes, and I don't know really what accounts for that kind of shifting ability to know whether something is good or not. I think maybe it has a lot to do, you know, with kind of my emotional attachment to the song, and the subject matter can kind of dictate, you know. I've written songs that came from a very personal place, and were very, very emotionally tied to me, and I thought after I finished the song, well, I think this is brilliant. But then later on, after Rebecca listens to it and we talk about it, my emotions really, I think, distorted my view of whether it was a good song or not. So you know, that's certainly happened, and I think a lot of writers can probably, you know, understand, you know, or experience that. But of course, there's that kind of initial. Sometimes what happens is you think something is absolutely brilliant, and then, you know, I take it to Rebecca, and she says, no, that doesn't work at all. And then it's like you've just fallen off of a cliff. It's this awful, you know, feeling. I just wasted all that time, and, you know, which it's not a waste. It's not a waste.
No.
But it feels like it in the moment, because one of the best things about Rebecca is that she never blows sunshine up my ass, I guess is the best way to. She absolutely never does that. She is honest with me, and I know I can trust that even though she knows that I may not like what I hear, you know, her comments, she says it anyway. But we also, through our relationship over the years, have kind of grown in how we do that kind of critical process. And if I'm not in the right emotional headspace to take that honest criticism, I don't go to her anymore. I mean, in the early days, I would just run to her and say, "Listen to this," no
Yep.
matter what she was doing. I was like, "Oh, could you drop that and listen to this?" Which is kind of selfish and whatever. But I also, if she said, "No, that doesn't work," I'd get very hurt and shut down, that sort of thing. Basically, act like a kid, I guess. But I want to say I feel like I've matured in that, and we've kind of agreed that if I'm not in that right headspace to take criticism, we probably shouldn't be doing that.
Right.
So.
I think it's impressive, honestly, that the two of you have figured out that complicated dance at all. You're saying it doesn't work perfectly every time, but that you've stayed with it for so long, and that, I mean, it sounds pretty clear. She is your first editor. She's and that you trust her, and that she is willing, interested, game to play that difficult role. It's I mean, partly I am thinking about my own marriage and how, my wife, Amanda, is easily, among my very few biggest fans. My wife and my son have been such incredible supporters of my work.
Yeah.
But this has been a very sticky area for us, because, I think I have all this, I have similar challenges myself. I have a thin skin, especially when it comes to new material. It feels so vulnerable. Even when it's not that new, I have a very thin skin.
Right.
And so my editor, my sort of first line of editing is another songwriter.
Okay.
I always go to him, and somehow I haven't actually really thought through why that works so well and why it tends to be such a struggle for my wife and I. But it's like she's feels like she's walking on eggshells. Like she doesn't want to hurt my feelings, which is a terrible position for her to be in. And and again, me with having the thin skin about it. So it feels to me like some of the the challenges in the relationship. We've been together 25 years, so we've worked through quite a lot. But somehow this seems to magnify some of the sticky spots that we haven't quite gone through. So anyway, I admire and appreciate that you and Rebecca have done what you've done there.
Yeah, and I'll add just another kind of recent development is that I recognize that when you're a songwriter, when you're an artist, and you have someone you live with who has a great critical sensibility, you can get to the point where you're kind of overusing it, and you're like you're depending on it too much because you've got a great critic in the house. I mean, and that's the most amazing thing that any artist can have. And I live with the woman, the love of my life, who happens to be an amazing critic, and it's very hard for me sometimes to not overuse it and to kind of cross that boundary. So lately, even in the last month or two, we've had conversations where we talk about how I need to stop kind of sucking all the air out of the room, I need to, not always be saying, "Hey, what do you think of this? What do you think of that?" I need to kind of, make sure that when I do ask that, that I'm being, kind of judicious about I mean, it's her time, she could be doing something else and she's giving that time to me, which is very, amazing and selfless. But I need to be respectful.
Yeah, I love that. It's such a constant in the world, the reality that as men we can dominate the space very easily, especially if there's women in the space. And kudos to her for being able to speak up and say what's what, and kudos to you for not being offended about it, or being able to listen to the extent that you can. That's again, I admire that. I tend to think that every song starts with a kernel, that there's some spark of inspiration, and that spark could be anything. Curious, in your process, does that tend a certain way, or are there many ways?
I think there are many ways for me. I'm a big, and we've talked about this before, but I'm a big sucker for metaphor. If I find a good metaphor for something, that tends to trigger songs pretty quickly. But it can be it's really varied. I mean, I have a song on the new record that was inspired by just looking out the window and seeing my stepdaughter cutting my wife's hair on the deck. And that probably is an example of where a song has come, the quickest. I just looked out the window and I only had to kind of see the scene for a couple seconds, and I knew right there was my song. Like, it was based practically all written for me, and I just kind of had to take, dictation. And it came in about 10 minutes. I went upstairs right away. I was washing dishes, stopped washing dishes, ran upstairs, and it very rarely happens that way. But that was one where it was just a visual scene that just did it for me. But no, it can be, sometimes I suppose sometimes I collect, like a lot of songwriters, I collect titles. I think that's what a lot of Nashville songwriters, they have notebooks full of titles, and
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of how they approach songs. You start with the title, you stick it up at the top of the page like a piece of gum, and then you just and then you write your song. I try not to get too dependent on one way of writing. I feel like the title method is a method, but it can also, I know for me even, I can rely on it too much, and there's like kind of a staleness that creeps into the writing if I'm just working from, I have this great title. It's kind of important to me to be kind of exploring a number of different avenues. Paintings have inspired songs for me. um History, local history, because I'm definitely more of a storyteller, songwriter. I've taken local history, and adapted it into songs, where I'm researching old newspaper articles, that sort of thing. And I've done some workshops over the years where I've kind of explained my different kind of methods for doing story songwriting, and had the participants in the workshop kind of try out some of the things. Sometimes it's as simple as just taking an unfamiliar book off the shelf, or a familiar one for that matter, and just opening it to a random page. That's another thing that I do to get inspired, and maybe a word pops out, and I don't really read the whole page, but just kind of skim it, and then something will pop out, a phrase or something, and that'll get something going. So yeah, lots of different places. Yeah.
It's great. Any thoughts on how your songwriting has evolved over time?
Yeah. Well, I think probably the most obvious answer would be that for this most recent record, I delved into my own life a little more than I ever had. And that's kind of an understatement, because, as you mentioned, the whole song, or the whole album, is about being a stepdad. I mean, basically every song in some way, focuses on my experiences as a stepdad and just my family dynamic. When Rebecca and I met, my stepdaughters were 3 and 5, and it was a long, kind of messy process in terms of kind of figuring out what my role was. And I had never written specifically about it until about 2018, fall of 2018. I had been at the Kerrville Folk Festival that spring, and I was sitting around with a bunch of other songwriters, and we were talking about our lives. And somebody, after I got done talking about the kind of messy situation at home with the girls and their father, and just a really difficult dynamic, someone said, "Well, you've written songs about that, right?" Or, and I said, No, I've never even occurred to me. And they said, you need to do that. You need to write songs about it. And it took me a few months. It's funny how those things work. It wasn't like I just grabbed a notebook after they said it and was like, "Oh yeah, all right." I actually kind of, dismissed it. I dismissed the advice. I wanted to continue writing in the vein that I was, which was kind of dark, rural, semi-fictional story songs. And it was really funny how it worked, because I got back from Kerrville and all of a sudden I couldn't write anything. And I very rarely have had anything resembling writer's block. I'm kind of a very routine person. a daily writer. I think it's really important for me to write on a regular basis. But I got back from Kerrville and I couldn't write a thing, and got incredibly frustrated. I mean, I remember I was trying to do anything to get inspired and to get something going. You know, I would on a weekend I would take off. I'd tell Rebecca, you know, I'm going to take off for 4 or 5 hours and just go drive, and where I end up, and I'm going to bring my guitar and hopefully I can get things going again. And it went on for a month, or no, more than a month, until the fall, September. And the fall tends to be a more kind of fertile time for me anyway. But I still remember it was a September morning, and I sat down at the table, and two lines had come to me, and they were directly from my own life, and that started a couple years of just writing personal songs about my own life. It was a real turning point for me. So yeah, that's a big change.
Wow, what an incredible evolution. We'll certainly be talking more about that element of your writing as we listen to your songs. So before we dive in, let's just talk nuts and bolts for a moment about your songwriting, the physical part of your songwriting process. Are you writing on paper, computer, pen, pencil? Do you record voice memos of the music when you're in process? Let's talk nitty gritty.
Yeah. Well, once again, I think it's a variety of ways. I don't have one set way. I would say through the writing of this last album, and this is kind of an interesting method, but I used note cards, and there was something about the smallness of the note cards that felt really not intimidating, I guess. And so I had this stack of note cards on the windowsill. I would often write in my little office studio at the time, near the window, and I would have this stack of note cards, and I would get just like a fragment of a line or maybe a line, and I would write it down in fairly large handwriting on the note card, and that was all that I would write on that note card. I would put that card down on the windowsill and then start repeating that line and playing around, with chords or whatever. And then maybe something else would come. And so I would scratch down another, and so it was this kind of really interesting process of writing things out in this kind of fragmented way where everything was on these note cards. So I would end up with, 20 note cards at the end of the morning with, little fragments. And then I would, try to kind of piece things together from those note cards, and move to, writing it out on a larger page, like a legal pad or something. And then when I got that where I felt like it was pretty tight, and that could be, a period of days or even weeks, that's when I would type it up. So it was kind of a gradual process of getting it to that. At other times in my life, I've done, just having my laptop up in front of me. That's kind of an interesting way of composing, just having the laptop up and typing it out. The voice recorder is very helpful. I've definitely used that to catch fragments of things. Actually, probably the voice recorder is one of the most common things that I do, and it often would be just playing and singing nonsense over the music. I've written a lot of songs where I just let the voice recorder. At that time, I was working my office job still, so I would write in the mornings, from 6:30 in the morning till 8 or 8:30. And then on the way to work, I would listen to whatever I had recorded, and a lot of the time it was just nonsense. But then, you'd hear something maybe halfway through the song. Oh, now that I think sounds like really a song here, and just gradually take it from nonsense to sense. Yeah.
So interesting to hear about your note card method. Just when you thought you've heard of every way to write to put a song together. Yeah. Never heard of anyone doing that. But interestingly, back to my background as a screenwriter, that is a very common way to in the one of the early phases of screenwriting is outlining. And outlining for a screenwriter, screenplays are interesting and have helped me so much with my songwriting because it is such a vast project of compiling all of these scenes, and then a collection of scenes has to fit into an act. And in the most common way of writing a screenplay, there's a 3-act format. And so it's like all of these little bigger blocks make up a whole narrative story. And I, like you, am, largely a narrative style songwriter. But note cards, it's like generally one common method for screenwriting is to have a gigantic corkboard, and to tack up these little note cards, exactly.
Sure.
Because that way you can move them around.
Yeah.
It's like you're dealing with so many moving parts in a screenplay. Oftentimes you write a good scene and, the scene does everything it's supposed to do. It turns, it moves the narrative forward, but you realize, it's the order of this is funny. And then you can move the order around. So interesting to hear the way you're using that for, a song. Screenwriting is something I've done in the past when it takes all of my attention. It takes so much time. In order to conceive of that much information, I have to be in it for hours. I can't just pop in and pop out. Whereas songs, I like the way you described, writing in the morning and then you're listening to the recording on the way to work. For me anyway, and it sounds like for you also, it's a much more digestible, much more feasible project for the little stolen moments. And, you have an idea, a little bit of inspiration, and you can jot that down and come back to it later.
Yes. I had to train myself, though, to do that, work in those little stolen moments, or, just work. Because my tendency, like a lot of, songwriters, I think, is if given any opportunity, I would sit all day and work on something without eating, without drinking,
right.
Like
right.
that's my default. And
right.
so, recognizing that, hey, I do have a job, it took me quite a while, though, to get to a point where one of the things I do now, and I do this both with songwriting and painting, is I know that I'm not going to be able to finish something, but I tell myself that's okay. I have this kind of inner dialogue with myself. That's okay. But recognize that moment where something has broken open and stop right there. Stop at that moment and recognize you have other responsibilities. You're in a good mood. Something just broke open. You're done. Even if you have like maybe another half an hour that you could paint or you could write, stop, enjoy the moment, enjoy what happened, recognize that it's not done. And there's always a risk that it could, turn out to be shit. But take joy in that small moment and then recognize that you'll feel a lot better at the end of the day if you do that, as opposed to, calling in at work and being like, hey, I'm going to be an hour late today, which I've done before for the sake of a song.
Right. I love that notion, that the sort of instruction, the call for the artist to follow joy. What a terrific idea.
Yeah.
Well, let's dive into your songs. The first song we'll listen to is the one I have chosen, and it's called Hornet's Nest.
Hung out back in the evergreen, biggest nest I'd ever seen. I grew up rough and I grew up lean on the hatred that I'd seen. Watched them circling overhead, devouring hours in my dread. And each night when I went to bed, I heard my old man say, now we don't go stirring up a hornet's nest. Now we don't go kicking up a scene. Now we don't go showing all our ugliness, 'cause we'll get 'em after dark with gasoline. Yeah, we'll get 'em after dark with gasoline. Boys I knew were out for blood. The boys I knew would sting you good. You could paint your face all up with mud, they'd find you anyway. One day I came around the bend, watched them swarm around my friend. I knew their game would never end, so I turned and ran away. I snuck out back and I got lit up, stolen gin in a coffee cup. I swore I'd mess those hornets up, but I heard my old man say, now we don't go stirring up a hornet's nest. Now we don't go kicking up a scene. Now we don't go showing all our ugliness, 'cause we'll get 'em after dark with gasoline. Yeah, we'll get 'em after dark with gasoline. My old man is in the ground, boys and you still rule this town. The evergreen was long cut down, but the hornets still remain. And I keep holding on to words that I don't mean, and I keep dreaming of a can of gasoline, and I keep dreaming of a can of gasoline.
I felt reluctant to choose Hornet's Nest out of the many songs of yours that I love, mostly because it's one of your hits and it might have been more fun to listen to a deeper cut. But your new album is very personal. And to me, Hornet's Nest is one of the most personal songs from your first 3 albums. And in that way, it seemed to me like an interesting precursor to New Weather, your most recent album. I want to also point out that I think there's a certain honesty and vulnerability to everything you've done. But many of those older songs were character studies of one kind or another, not directly about you. So I'm curious, did Hornet's Nest in any way inform your decision to take this more autobiographical approach on the new record?
No, it didn't. It's funny. That's a really interesting, question, but it really didn't it even occur to me. I mean, I think, those older songs, as you say, lots of character sketches, kind of semi-fictionalized. And Hornet's Nest itself, there are elements of fiction in it, but it also comes from a very deeply, personal place as well. But I don't think that I was, I guess I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready to, write explicitly, I guess, about my personal life. Although I did recognize that there was something about Hornet's Nest that people latched onto, and I think the fact that it is, rooted very much in my life, even if there was some fictionalizing going on and some slight, I don't know if I want to say distorting, but massaging of things. But there's something there that people connect with, and as you say, I that's very nice of you to say that it's feels genuine. I think it came from a very genuine place, almost unexpectedly. I don't remember too much about the writing of Hornet's Nest, except that it came quickly, as the best, songs often do. I almost feel like I had been reading, I think I was reading a poem or something that had no connection whatsoever to the song. And the title of the poem was Hornet's Nest. And I thought to myself, Hornet's Nest. That's an interesting kind of metaphor to work with. And I really didn't have any idea what I was going to do with it. But it was kind of one of those cases where I thought, maybe it'll be a title, Hornet's Nest, I really liked the poem, but I don't even remember what the poem was about. It had nothing to do with what the song ended up. I'm not didn't plagiarize that, but anyway, it started with that kernel of the title, and then the personal stuff emerged as I was writing it. I think it started out as kind of purely fictional, and then as it often happens, the personal crept in. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You wrote it in you released it rather in 2017.
Yeah.
What's it like listening to it 6 years later?
I'm very proud of it. Very proud of it. I think it's one of those cases where I feel like I, captured lightning in a bottle, so to speak,
Yeah, sure.
And it's one of those rare cases where, fortunately I've had some other similar experiences, like the song I was talking about a little earlier about my stepdaughter cutting my wife's hair. I felt like that was also kind of a capturing lightning in the bottle sort of experience as well, but in a very different way and in a very different kind of process. But yeah, I'm very proud of it. People really tend to love it. It's an interesting song in that it is incredibly dark. And depending on the audience that I play it for, I think I've mentioned this to you before, but in the right, or I don't know, wrong setting, right setting, I don't know, whatever you want to say. In certain settings, when I play that song, I think the darkness of it kind of, people don't quite know what to do with it, with that line at the end of the chorus about gasoline.
Mm-hmm.
And I've actually had laughter. I've had people laugh at it, and I think it's an element of kind of surprise. It kind of comes out of nowhere, and it's so exceedingly dark. I've had people come up to me afterwards and say, "You're really talking about what I think you're talking about in that song with the gasoline?" Like, yep. Anyway, yeah, I'm very proud of it.
Hornet's Nest is a reckoning with a painful part of your history, both in terms of growing up in a town where you were not afforded a sense of belonging, and where you were ostracized as an artist, and in terms of your father's passing, which I believe was shortly before you made that record.
Yep. Yes.
What was it like to take that difficult lived experience and translate it into this song? And why do you think it was so effective? And I'll just add, I know from experience that making songs out of your hardships often results in a song that's hard to listen to. Mm-hmm. And this is a song that you were just sort of commenting on this, that your fans clearly clamor for, even if they have different, kinds of reactions to it. There's something in it that folks are hungry to hear.
Yeah. It's interesting because I don't recall it being a hard thing to write at all. I remember it coming very quickly, as I said. It was one of those kind of, really special moments where something comes very quickly, and I know that I have something really good, and I'm not disappointed when I take it to Rebecca, like I played it for Rebecca, and she immediately said that's a Dynamite song or something like that. But actually, I think the difficult part has been performing it over the years at certain points. Depending on my emotional, where I'm at, my father did pass a number of years ago, and had passed, before I wrote the song. And so there have been moments, I think, where it's been difficult to, there've been, some moments where it has brought emotions up while I'm playing that have been difficult, in the moment to deal with. I think that it's a song, I guess I would say, that I've always really been able to kind of get behind when I play it. And I think that's because, it does come from those kind of teen angsty years. I mean, so much of the song comes from my experiences in 7th, 8th, 9th grade, when you're at your, most, what's the right word? Fragile in a way.
Yeah.
It's really a time of, fragility. And things that happen during those years are just burned into you. And while, there is an element of fiction in the song, the gasoline part, I did not go out and, do anything like that to anybody else. But like, I think now that I think about it, probably that part of the song, there may have been some inspiration there because I recall uh, a school fight. Well, it was off school property. I recall watching a guy in my high school class fighting another guy, and he had him in a headlock, and he had his lighter out, and he was trying to set his hair on fire.
Oh my God.
And so like crazy stuff like that. I went to a small rural school, but there were some really rough guys, in my class and some of the surrounding classes, and it made a big impression on me. The little verse about watching, my friend, you know, that still brings up tough emotions.
Sure.
Yeah, it was a tough thing, because in all honesty, I remember thinking, this friend who ended up getting beaten up by, some other guys, I so wanted him to win that fight, and he didn't.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It, the I'm endlessly interested in I don't know, the notion of revenge, which I think is part of what is something. It's something that's striking about this song. I think partly because it's unexpected coming from you, in a way. I think as an certainly as a man, but as an artist also, we don't. That's not a tone we're getting from you a lot. That edge of anger,
Right.
And I think that's part of what makes it so real. And I think about revenge a lot in terms of living in the United States. I feel like more than most world cultures, we have a strong current of vengeance. If you look, if you look at our popular cinema, it is everywhere. We're obsessed with the idea of getting back at those who have done us wrong, and it's part of there's obviously a toxic end of it, the part of our national identity where we see ourselves as victims in the face of us being aggressors internationally, militarily, and economically, right, in so many ways. But and somehow I feel like your song is doing something different, and I think that's part of what people understand, whether they know. Whether they could articulate that or not. And I think what you've just explained about your friend, all songs, back to my screenwriting background, if you're familiar with Joseph Conrad's book, Hero of a Thousand Faces, that book is the tome that all screenwriting is based on. Okay. And the central thesis of it is that every story is the same story. That, whether it's a movie or whether it's a song or an epic poem, that every story is the story of the hero's journey. It's the story of struggle.
Yeah.
And we interpret that a million different ways, and ultimately it is the same story over and over. And, it's like the story here. And I think the story of revenge is a story of fighting for yourself. And, whether it's fighting for your friend and for justice there, or fighting for justice on your own behalf. That I think that's deeply meaningful to each of us, and so anyway, I enjoy about this song. I love about this song.
Well said. I like that. Very much. You took a very. I like how you took a very local song, and your comments, as you often do, you're able to kind of put it in a broader context. Yeah, I like that very much.
Looking at the lyrics for Hornet's Nest on paper, I noticed that it has an odd structure. The first verse has 2 verse parts. Second verse has 3 verse parts. And this kind of asymmetry can be awkward in a song. As a listener, you're looking for a sort of a rhythm and a familiarity. It works perfectly here. In fact, I felt like it helped build momentum for the song, where we get a shorter verse than the chorus, then a longer second verse, which helps us feel like we're building momentum in the narrative and in the emotional arc. Was that intentional? Was that instinct? Have you ever thought about it?
I don't remember it being, it happened fairly quickly. I don't remember there being a lot of intention behind it. I remember, just, oh gosh, it was, so long ago. I'm trying I don't remember there being a lot of intention in that structure. I totally agree with you that that can be very awkward in a song. And actually, it's funny you mention it, because as soon as you said that, I thought to myself, well, actually typically do the opposite now, where I'll start out with a longer verse and then maybe have a like a truncated or a shorter a shorter verse as a second verse, which maybe is more common. I think that's kind of in maybe even a pop sensibility in pop music. You often hear that, like there's
That's my
a
sense.
fuller first, and then they want to get back to that hook, they want to get
Right.
back to that chorus, and so I think my more recent stuff is poppier. I mean, it's not pop music, but it definitely has more elements of in some ways,
Sure.
certainly more than some of that earlier stuff. But I don't recall there being and I feel like back when I wrote that song, I was still, I feel like I wasn't a newbie, but I learned so much after, so I don't know how much I was really conscious of when I wrote that song. I feel like in terms of the craft of songwriting, I've learned a lot more in the last 3 or 4 years, and thought more consciously about my craft a lot more than I did back when I wrote that song. Yeah.
One last question about Hornet's Nest, and we'll move on to
Sure.
the next song. In a song where each of the lyrics seem so pristine and expertly crafted, there's one line that stands out to me and gives me chills, and it is the second to last line. I'll read the verse before the line and then read the line. So it goes, well, my old man is in the ground. Boys I knew still rule this town. The evergreen was long cut down, but the hornets still remain. And I keep holding on to words that I don't mean. And I keep dreaming of the can of gasoline. It's the line, and I keep holding on to words that I don't mean, that really grabs me right in the gut, in spite of the fact that I'm not actually sure what you're talking about. I love
That's a
a
good
verse.
question.
I love a verse
Yeah.
like this, something that seems to be so deeply embedded in truth that you don't have to understand it to have a visceral reaction to it. And you're under no obligation to explain the line if you don't want to. A songwriter is entitled to some mystery, but you're certainly welcome to. And either way, I'm curious for your thoughts about that.
I think that line, if I remember correctly, and I don't know if I really know what it means myself, but I'll as best I can kind of explain. I think that line, the whole idea of holding on to words that you don't mean, is the idea that I wrote this song, how many years after graduating high school, and for a number of years after high school, I had these as not unexpected feelings of real resentment towards a lot of the people that I grew up with in
Sure.
school, the people who had bullied me. I mean, of course, perfectly natural, right?
Right.
I remember even when I was in college thinking, if I ever run across one of those guys again, I just would, but over time, I think that subsided, but yet not totally, so there's this kind of in between, as the years pass, time, distance, you let go of things, and so the idea that you're still holding on to these words, these feelings of hate that manifest, themselves in the song, that maybe because embedded in that song for me is a hatred of those guys that I grew up with.
Sure.
But at the point that I wrote that song, I had let go of
Right.
a lot of that hatred, and
You'd
so the
grown a
idea
lot.
that I don't really mean, I wouldn't, if I saw one of these guys, and had an opportunity to do something to them, like I wouldn't really do that, but I still hold on to the residue of that, and there's still a hatred that runs deep in me. So I think that's where that line was coming from. Yeah.
That's just is so powerful. The notion of the places where we have not managed to heal. It's just to me so relevant for each of us.
Yeah.
All right, we'll move on to our second Austin MacRae song. This is the song you have chosen. It is "Shades of Grey" from your new record, New Weather.
Strip it down now, down to the bone. Some days I feel useless, some days I feel alone. When I first met her, the girls were 5 and 3, little bolts of lightning, they eyed me suspiciously. But in time they let me hold them, went swinging from my arms. And I've loved them through the hard times, and I've tried to keep them warm. 'Cause it's a ride like no other. I'm not their father, I'm something other. Gotta trust our captain, gotta trust their mother. Gotta be okay with shades of gray. Well, we used to talk of babies, but the time was never right. The seas were always difficult, the stakes were much too high. They used to have this vision, delicate and wild, swimming deep between us, the dream of our third child. But we chose to let it slip away to someone else's shore. And I loved our 2 girls harder than I'd ever loved before. 'Cause it's a ride like no other. I'm not their father, I'm something other. Gotta trust our captain, gotta trust their mother. Gotta be okay with shades of gray. Today I made some coffee, and it wasn't just for me. A splash of milk in both their mugs, and chocolate to make it sweet. 'Cause that's the way they like it, and I'm happy just to know. I'm happy I got one thing right before they have to go. And I wish them gentle passage, may they find more joy than pain. May they stand inside the shadows and learn to love the rain. 'Cause it's a ride like no other. It's bittersweet and full of wonder. Gotta pull the sunlight from the thunder. Gotta be okay. 'Cause it's a ride like no other. I'm not their father, I'm something other. Gotta trust our captain, gotta trust their mother. Gotta be okay with shades of gray. Gotta be okay with shades of gray.
There are a lot of songs about how men feel about the women they're romantically involved with, and backing the woman you love. I don't think I've ever heard a man write about that in the way that you have here. What made you want to do that?
Well, I guess as much as I can recall, it was another one of those songs that I had, just a small fragment for. I knew that I wanted to write a song about my role, specifically about my role as a stepdad, and the kind of conflicted role that I was feeling a lot of, feeling very conflicted about my role when I wrote this song. But I think as the song kind of developed, if I remember correctly, I realized that the solution to all of this for us was for me to get in line and and basically trust, and support Rebecca taking the lead in the family. Um, you know, a lot of different factors. I struggled with that for a number of years. A lot of different, societal factors, your upbringing, all of that stuff.
Yeah.
Just being a man and being, certain expectations that have been embedded in you. But it became clear after a number of difficult years that for us to continue as a any sort of family unit, any semblance of a family unit, that I needed to kind of get behind Rebecca and support her. And yeah, I think it just naturally came out of the time that I was writing the song in, and I was at a point where it kind of had dawned on me that, well, with help, it didn't just dawn on me one day that I needed to, I think I had some therapy. I worked with a wonderful guy who was an expert, at dealing with step parenting, and integrating, kind of, families together where there had been a divorce, and so with a lot of help, we had made this plan, and I think that comes out in the song, that chorus, trusting our captain, was certainly came out of that.
That's amazing. Not to sound like a broken record, but again, this album is very personal. And I know as a songwriter, one of the issues that never leaves your mind is the reality that if you write a good song, you'll have to play this song over and over to friends, family, strangers. And when the subject matter is so raw, that's the sort of cross that you have to carry as an artist. What's that been like with this song and this album?
Well, to be honest, I don't play it very often. That's one way I deal with that. I don't play it very often, and when I do play it, when I think about playing it, I think about the particular venue, the environment. I think about it very carefully. It's not a song that I just slap on the set list. It's probably, it's the song. It's the song that I have to be most careful with of anything that I've written, I think. Mm-hmm. And so it's interesting you bring that up, because I don't know if I told you this, but at the release party that we did a few months ago for the album, I played it because we played the record front to back, and Rebecca had certainly heard me play it before, but my stepdaughter Erin was there, and they had not heard the song. I thought they had heard it because I gave them a copy of the CD, a week ahead of time, with kind of that in mind, that it'd probably be good if they were going to come to the release show that they would want to listen to the whole thing. Mm-hmm. But they hadn't listened to the whole thing at that point. And so there was this moment when we were playing that song where I looked out and I made eye contact with Erin, and then Erin made eye contact with Rebecca, and then I made eye contact. There was this whole triangle thing going on. And it was very hard for me to keep the song going without derailing it. I did, because I just chalk that up to probably just experience. I have little things that I say to myself if I feel like I'm getting too emotionally, in a difficult place when I'm playing a song. I have little things that I say to myself inside my head, that help me get back on track. And so I probably used one of those things. But yeah, it's not a song that I play live very often. It's not a song that I really want to play that often. I'm very proud of it. Like Hornet's Nest, it's a song that I'm very proud of. It was, in fact, the first song that I wrote for that record.
Wow.
So yeah, it was the first. It was that breakthrough song when I was talking about coming back from Kerrville and having writer's block.
Right.
It was the first song that I wrote, and it was kind of the breakthrough song. And I think listening to it again a few minutes ago, it occurred to me that the first two lines of that song, let's strip it down now, down to the bone. That was me kind of like getting geared up, like, hey, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna write a song that really reveals how I'm feeling and focuses on what's going on in my life.
Oh, that's
But I
great.
couldn't do it in the first two lines, nor do I think that would have been beneficial for the song necessarily, but I couldn't do it. I had to have like a kind of hint of metaphor there. Let's strip it down now. Let's strip the setup, and then I could
Yeah.
say some days I feel useless, some days I feel alone.
Yeah. How incredible. I love that. It seems to me like one of the hard things about being a step parent, though I've never been a step parent, is that people often talk about you or treat you like you're not really a parent, or, maybe not a real parent, which is clearly not true. But on this song, you've described the experience of parenting in a way that any parent of any stripe can relate to. And you've also left the listener 100% clear through the deep truths of the song that you're as much a parent as any biological parent. You've laid out how at least that's how I feel. You've laid out how parenting is a sort of impossible job under impossible conditions, and how if we're lucky, we and our children make it through that crucible together, even if we don't make it through unscathed. And I'm not exactly sure what the question here is, but it's something like, how much did you have to write this just because as songwriters and as musicians, so much of what we do because we have to. There's not a better reason. And how much did you write this because you were trying to put something out there in a different way?
Oh, wow. I don't know. I've never really thought about that. I mean, there were definitely, both impulses are in the, certainly in there. I guess I would say it kind of oscillated back and forth between that, I think the first song, the Shades of Grey song, which was the first song I wrote for it, I had to write that. I had to write that. I really wasn't thinking about, it would be really cool if I wrote, songs about being a stepdad and, people would connect with that. Not just step parents, but parents, and basically, almost everyone's a parent, not everyone, but like, there are a lot of parents out there.
Right.
So I wasn't thinking about it in those terms of like, oh, that would be, really, really neat to put that out into the world. As it became clearer to me that there was a lot to write about and a lot that I had to write about and a lot of different angles that I could take, then I think I probably started thinking about it more in terms of, I think people would really, I think this is, in a sense, kind of a concept album that people could really connect to, and I've never heard an album like that before, written from the perspective of a step parent. So yeah, maybe later on as the song started coming, but really it was just, I had to at that point write that song. I had so much pent up emotion, because of the years of trying to make things work here at the house. We had, as I said, a very messy, difficult situation where we had gotten full custody of the girls, and they did not want to live with us at all. They absolutely did not want to live with us. And we got full custody, and they would go visit their father every other weekend. That was what he was allotted, and it was super, super tough. It was the toughest thing I've ever done in my life. So I had those years of that just building up, and I really wasn't creeping in up to that point, wasn't creeping into the artwork, the art at all. And so it was a real kind of, as I said, it was like 2 years straight of writing nothing but stepdad songs. And I have a number of them that I will never release and probably never play. I have ones that I have not played for Rebecca because I think it would be too hard for her. Yeah. Yep.
Thanks for being honest about it. It's an incredible window into the life of a creator. So before we wrap up this second song, I have one more question, which is, so again, there's a passage in this song that stands out to me, just because it's the part that makes me cry every time. For me as a songwriter, I look for that. If I write a lyric that makes me cry, I can be pretty sure that I'm on a track to something. As I read Shades of Grey in written form, as I read it, I was surprised to find that, like Hornet's Nest, this passage is also at the end of the song. And I just wanted to digress for a minute to say that I once heard a famous comedian say that when you write an hour comedy special, you're supposed to close with your strongest bits. So what she does is she writes her hour, and then she takes the end, which is her strongest material, and puts it at the beginning, and then forces herself to rework the end until it becomes the strongest part of the hour. And when I heard that, I was really impressed from an editing point of view with those kinds of high standards. I just thought that was incredible. So anyway, your songs are very strong, and they end with such ferocity. And that made me wonder if you have particular habits in terms of trimming the fat and in terms of not settling for a good line that could maybe become a great line.
Yeah, I think I think that some of that is informed by my experience with poems. I think that my sensibility of, ending strong, comes from my poetry writing. That's a really amazing what you just said about the comedian. That's incredible. Oh my God. I can't say that I've ever really done anything like that, but yeah, that's a good question in terms of trimming the fat. Yeah, I'm trying to think of like a good example of, I guess I'm always very, conscious that for me, the ending is, the beginning and the ending are really the most important parts of the song. You have to have that hook that hooks people in. That first line needs to be good. But in terms of my own, like, kind of methods for doing that, I mean, I do revise. I really do. I'm a big believer in revision. And I will also, I also save things, that maybe I don't think are quite right for the song, but, I guess it was, I can't remember exactly which writer it was who talked about they always had a kind of lumber pile of spare parts, at the bottom of the page. Maybe it was, I want to say maybe it was William Faulkner who said that, that
interesting.
He had this lumber pile of stuff. And I certainly do that, even if I take something out of a song, in the moment, like I may keep it down at the bottom of the page or scroll it somewhere in the margins, or just kind of have a collection of material, because sometimes things work their way back into songs when you get to a later stage in the process. But I don't know if that's a great answer, but yeah,
it's a great answer.
Yeah.
I love the idea of a lumber pile. It's because when I write, I also have this. I mean, I have a rule: you never throw anything away.
No.
You cut something out, you got to at least note that you had it there.
Yeah.
And I love these new ways of thinking about old habits. I just made a record at Great North Sound Studio in southern Maine, which is owned by a guy named Sam Kassir, who is an incredible keyboard player and works on his own projects and many other projects. And when Sam came in to play on a couple of my songs, he noticed that I have these little throwaway acoustic guitar licks that end up becoming the central musical hook of the song. And he had a name for this, which is, he called it an eel in the reef.
Huh. Wow.
So
I like that.
And so now I'm always listening for these eels in the reef that are usually a little throwaway piece of melody that I add to a solo acoustic performance because I'm trying to add a little bit of ornamentation.
Right.
And it's usually my first instinct. And somehow those end up being the things that become, kind of the beating pulse of the recorded full band song, which is so interesting. You'd think you'd just toss it. But every time I try to toss it, I'm always saying to the producer, my producer, Colin, I was playing this, but let's put something better in there. And every time he's like, no.
That works. That works. Eel in the reef. I love that. That's so poetic.
Eel in the reef.
And that's great.
And the wood pile, was it? Is that what you said?
Lumber pile.
Yeah, much better.
Yeah, lumber pile.
Okay, so anyway, the verse that I was talking about, that was somewhat of a digression on my part. I'm glad we got to talk about the things that you were saying there. So now we'll get to the verse, which is here at the end of the song. And I wish them gentle passage. May they find more joy than pain. May they stand inside the shadows and learn to love the rain. 'Cause it's a ride like no other. It's bittersweet and full of wonder. Gotta pull the sunlight from the thunder. Gotta be okay with shades of gray. Sometimes we change a chorus once we've established its familiarity to offer the listener a different take on that familiar part of the song. And you do that here at the end of the song. The other choruses are identical, and this one, what I've just read is the end verse part and then the chorus. What stands out to me about this final verse and alternate chorus is how very simple it is, in a sense. And this goes back to the top of the podcast. You were commenting on this about your writing and you mentioned about your painting, which hadn't occurred to me. You've managed to do something that I find tremendously valuable and also very difficult to do. You've created big emotion with simple and accessible words and poetry. In the hands of a less effective songwriter, some of this could come off as cliche, and you've taken poetry that any of us can understand and made it deeply affecting. Talk a little bit about your relationship to this. If you have anything else to say, I guess we already talked about it a bit, but anything else to say or about this passage I've pulled out specifically as a writer and a performer.
Yeah. So I think at that point,